I have organized around the idea that the thinking makes it so. Thinking makes it so. Now, one of the things that we know, if I could direct you out there in the foyer, and I looked, and we don't have a copy of what we believe, one of the things that we will find in there is that our thoughts, our thinking, our awareness is the key to how our lives unfold. In the first part of Science of Mind, the very first part, Ernest Holmes is very adamant when he says that the intelligent law is absolutely response to directed thought and to use that thought intelligently. Active intelligence, that's what it responds to. And then he goes on to say, but it is always operating. Always operating. That's on page 31 in the Science of Mind textbook. If you back up to the previous page, it begins a little section called All Thought is Creative. And in the first sentence, he says, all thought is creative, not just some thought. They said this wouldn't work if it was, well, that thought doesn't count because I forgot what I was doing. All thought is creative. So my talk today is sort of organized around that idea. Now, I'm using the idea of Ernest Holmes to anchor what I'm talking about, but the inspiration for this particular conversation today came from the Deepak Chopra book, Quantum Healing. It is, we're near the end of it for our book reading on Wednesday mornings. But it happened last week that many people who are usually there were not there, but there were people there who hadn't been in a long time for lots of reasons, a number of weeks anyway. And so I said to them, well, what if we just go back some, scroll back, and then maybe we'll pick up some interesting things. And that way, the people who are usually here, who will probably come next week, we won't be skipping them. Everybody has reasons. We've been meeting on Wednesday mornings since April of 2020. People are just going to miss sometimes, right? This is over 4 years we've been doing this class. So different books, but the same class. So that's what we did. And the chapter that we're in is called Birth of a Disease. Now, I'm using this because I do believe that our thinking is what creates our life. And my title comes from Shakespeare in the voice of Hamlet when he said, nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Now, those thoughts are incorporated on page 30 and 31 in the Science of Mind textbook. And so if you've taken Science of Mind, that's literally Science of Mind 101, that you get to that. Inevitably, in classes, there are questions, wait a minute, how could it be neither good nor bad? I mean, Hitler. And you could go in and look what's happened to those children last week and bringing up all of these things. How can you say that's neither good nor bad? And so we get into all of those machinations about that, which I'm not going to go into. But see, that's the issue. Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And Ernest Holmes says, all thought is creative. You can't just have some thought creative and not thought creative. Now, the mass things that happen out there, even the evil things we may think are happening now, last week, last year, we're not focusing on that. I'm not in the topic. What I'm thinking about is those things that affect us, that we label good and bad, and what that does for us, and how are we labeling it in that way. Birth of a Disease is the name of the chapter. So it begins, and I'm beginning the part where I'm talking, is that Deepak Chopra is very American in his life, but he was raised in India. His father was a physician, and so he was well off in society, but he was very much immersed in Indian culture. And Indian culture was, and I think is, sort of two different worlds. I mean, the siddhas, the rishis, the different spiritual people that are around are just mixed in. He even says that he remembers as a young boy walking through the streets of the city he lived in, and there would be men in nice English suits with their ties and everything's really tight, and they're walking, and there's the spiritual man in his loincloth and his yellow saffron robes just sitting in the middle of the sidewalk. People just walk around them. They don't think anything of it, because literally two worlds just intermingle. So in his own thinking, going back to the words of the ancient texts, the texts of the rishi, just have meaning for him because it comes from his own experience. So near the beginning of this book, of this chapter, Birth of a Disease, he is quoting an ancient text, and he made him think of Ayurveda, which is a system of medicine he talks about. And he was impressed just by these 3 lines. It says, as is the human body, so is the cosmic body. As is the human mind, so is the cosmic mind. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. And I also recall that in Troward's work, he kind of does that in reverse. He says that everything that is true on this plane is true for all the universe. He even dives down into, if you go to another planet, you do all this stuff, that the same laws apply. So this is not a new concept. It's ancient in these words from the text that Deepak Chopra is using, but it is true in this life. And then he said that while the words have many interpretations, basically it is simply saying that whatever is out there is actually in here. And he spent early parts of this book talking about how important our cells are. He originally wrote this book in something like 1982 or 3. I've forgotten that number. This edition was 2015. And he talks about how much we have learned in science about what was already known in these other traditions, that our cells have intelligence, each individual cell. Now, do you think about the cell of your liver has intelligence all on its own, and that it communicates with other parts of your body? And they've demonstrated that it does. And it can be your liver, it can be your gut, it can be any number of things. You are communicating within yourself. And we don't even realize that happens, and we're not in a tradition that helps us to understand that. And we've come into a system of medicine that's involved that says that this is your diagnosis, this is the medicine you take, and then you get well, and you do or you don't. And so he is challenging a number of those things, not saying that medicine, modern medicine, is not worthwhile. That is not what he says. He, Deepak Chopra, was a physician. He practiced endocrinology for years, and lots of his stories come from his practice of endocrinology in the Northeast, where he practiced. He found that, he was saying, though, that Ayurveda, and he's introducing this because of the story that I want to share with you, that he shares in this book. Ayurveda is a system of medicine, is what is generally called. He said, but with equal justice, he says, I could call it a system for curing delusion. What does that mean? We convince ourselves of things and believe it, whether it's true or not. Do you believe that you do that sometimes? Or have you seen that? Because we all do. That's not something that I feel is just an opinion. I see it referenced back to me many times. We convince ourselves. I convince myself. We name things and believe that that is the truth. He says that if we strip away the convincing quality of disease and let a healthier attitude take its place, we are on our way. He goes on to say that the literal translation of the roots of Ayurveda mean science of life. And so he confesses, he said that most of my practice happens when I just talk to people and I let them tell me, not just what their symptoms are, but how they feel about them and how committed they are to what they have. So that's what he does as part of his practice. So all of that leads up to the story that he tells about a young woman and her parents who came to him because she had had such a devastating series of symptoms and treatments and medications, and she simply could not get well. She had shortness of breath, she had palpitations, she was going through dizziness and fainted and all kinds of things. And she eventually, her parents were so concerned they took her to the emergency room. Well, once the emergency doctor listened to her heart, and pay attention to this, because these are all the things he detailed. He said she had a slight heart murmur, so he called an EKG. And they needed to clarify the EKG, so they had an echocardiogram and informed the family she has mitral valve prolapse. And that's what's causing a lot of this stuff. But I want her to spend the night in the hospital so that we can observe her. So they gave her, she had pain, sharp pain in this part of her body. So they gave her morphine for the pain. And they gave her oxygen so that maybe we could sleep. But because of the morphine, and because she's surrounded by people who've had heart attacks and strokes, and some are actually dying, she was traumatized, and she went to sleep in sort of this morphine-induced daze and sleep. The next morning, he examined her again, and he said that the prolapse that she has led to pericarditis, which is an inflammation of the lining around the heart. And so he gave her antibiotics. And so because her heart was racing when she got there, they gave her beta blockers to slow down her heart. And the pain in her chest subsided, but she couldn't tolerate those beta blockers. She was getting dizzy, she was falling down, she was throwing up, so they changed her medications. And then there was a new side effects, and Deepak Chopra writes, and expanded her constellation of symptoms. She continues, and she got things to dilate her blood pressure, and that caused her to faint and pass out, and she got her to feel dizzy, and she would faint without warning, but she wanted to go back to school. She was a young woman, she was in college, so she tolerated these side effects so she could get back to school. She managed to finish the year, and she came home for summer vacation, and then she started having breathing episodes, and one night she was just about passing out, and her parents sat many anxious nights trying to figure out, what can we do, and they're watching her, and they've already exhausted all of the doctor's stuff. There was nothing more the doctors could do. So they started reading in some news article, they heard about Ayurveda, and so they went to Deepak Chopra. So when they went to him, he read all of this stuff that had been done for her. He read her explanation of her symptoms before he even sat down with them. And so when he sits down with them, the first thing he said is, your pain is not from your heart. And to prove it, he just sort of pushed on her sternum. And she could feel it, but it wasn't pain. It wasn't causing her pain. So she said that you originally may have had, he said, you're still tender. What you originally had was an inflammation there where the rib cartilage meets the rib cage, and it's called costochondritis. And it can sometimes happen after you have a cold, and she had a cold. And it brought on the pain, which brought on all the other stuff, which was mostly caused by the treatments that she was given. Well, she and her parents were startled, to say the least. He says, I go on talking, taking apart the puzzle piece by piece, explaining how you get from one thing to another. And then he went on to say the violence of her attack caused all of this stuff. And he says, maybe the ER doctor, he's made a mistake when he diagnosed that you had inflammation of the heart. He really didn't. But he needed to find something, because there you were, and you needed something. And so that is what he did. And all of the other things you have experienced, have been brought on by your medications or directly by you. Well, at this point, the girl's parents were quite offended. They are the ones that have sat up all night. They want everything to be better. How can you blame her? Because he says, I'm not blaming anybody. And he goes into this whole discourse how American medicine really has gotten us to the point that we've got medicines for everything. And when we don't know what to do. And then we say it's all in your head or something like that. And that's offensive. If I just tell you there's nothing wrong with you, it's all in your head, you know your pain is real. And nobody has really helped you. And so he's stepping into that at this point because he knows that there's nothing really wrong with her. And so they were uneasy, and they kept on talking. And finally, she's not saying anything. The parents are arguing more than she is, but finally she says, so I'm creating this thing? And he says, no, you're not creating it, but you're participating in it. And then she goes on to say, how do I do that? And so that's when he tells her that what you have to do is break out of your own conditioning. And so he teaches her. He says, the next time, if you can do this, I want you to feel that pain and step back and observe it. Just let it be. And he goes on, he elaborates a little more. But that's essentially what he does. He doesn't hear from them for 2 weeks. And he got a little concerned that maybe he was heavy-handed and all that. But curiosity got the best of him, and he called the parents. And they said that the news was very good. She has no more any of those conditions. She's off all the medications. She's having no more conditions. She still will have the occasional pain here, but she said, I've learned to just watch the pain, and it's coming less and less. They've just essentially disappeared. And so he said, he goes on to talk about how our feelings can induce different pains, especially extreme feelings like loathing, hate, anger, and how they can bring things on. Psychologists know this, psychiatrists know this. And he goes on to mention many other things. But he says that medicine's paid a high price for not completely understanding the personal nature, but how we're involved with this. See, what this young woman did essentially was she identified with her disease, her diagnosis. And he said she began every sentence with, well, when my mitral valve he goes on. She owned it for herself and continued everything. And so this idea that we own the things that happen to us, I think we probably all do to a certain extent. When things get so bad that we have to do something, we often do. But I wonder, and I'm guessing, how many people in this room actually have some little thing that you accept as part of, that's who I am, that's what, this happened to me and I have this. I could raise my hand. I can absolutely raise my hand. And so what if, I'm asking myself, as well as everyone else, what if we stop doing that? Just stop doing that. Now, one of the things that Deepak makes a big point of is that when we're so identified, those cells in our body remember things longer, even if we let go of things mentally. There's intelligence within our body, within every cell in our body. So the thing about meditation is, and this is what the ancients understood, you go to a place where the cells are not speaking. It is simply you in that space. And by a dedicated practice of meditation, you can step back from that and find ways for yourself to actually move beyond owning this diagnosis, this thing that you may own. And when those things don't truly interfere with our lives so much, I mean, not enough that any of you would notice from someone else, we just rationalize that. Well, it's not that bad. I don't know. It's whatever we say. And I'm wondering, by repeating this particular part of this book, which is what we did today, I realized it was as much for me as it was for everyone in that class. When we actually repeated it starting last week with the 2 people that had missed it. And I realized that's when I decided to talk about that, because I think we're all involved to some degree. And so it's not for me to say to each of you anything except ask yourself, what is it that I need to look at in a different way? What can I do? I don't have answers for that, except to say that each of us has that divine, that one power, that self-contemplation of spirit that is within us. And that's how we know. We spend time with that. And we spend time with that until we understand what it is we need to understand. And so Ernest Holmes absolutely agrees with all of this. He says that you already have everything you need to move forward. He also says that happiness, joyfulness, all of the gifts of life are already yours for the claiming. Light, life, love, peace, power, beauty, and joy. That's what Troward said is in us. That joyful way of being is what we want to claim for each of us. And so I leave you today with this idea that you are the most powerful force in your life as you use the power that is equally within you as anyone else. Do you believe that? And the degree to which you believe that and practice that, there's nothing you cannot do. Absolutely nothing you cannot do. And so I agree with that and say, and so it is. And so it's time for us to share with this center much of the bounty that we already have, and we have a lot. Some of us volunteer, some of us give money, some of us do both, and there's more. But this is the time of the sharing of our treasure. And so I encourage you to release the gift and open up that circle of prosperity, that circulation of good within you by sharing of your bounty. And we will affirm this gift and put your hands, no matter what you're giving or when you give, know that the gift you give is between your hands as you say, divine love consecrates my gift. It goes forth to heal, to bless, and to prosper all those who give and all those who receive. I rejoice in the sharing of my good, and I release my gift with love, and so it is. So, the man with the microphone is standing by. So if anyone has a prayer treatment request or has a comment, I see a couple of hands up. We'll see what's happening here.
That was a wonderful talk. Thank you, Reverend Katherine. It made me think of a couple that is in the Spanish ministry at Founders. And in recent months, less than a year, the man was diagnosed with cancer. And the doctor implied that it was pretty serious. And he said, do you want to know, what I see? And they said, no, we'll listen to what you want to do for treatment, but we don't want to know the details or how bad it is.
Yeah.
And this is wonderful. This is to say, too, that the woman is a practitioner and the man is in science of mind studies, and they really live their faith. So he said, I will do whatever the doctor wants. I will do the chemo. I will go through that. It is tough. And it's been, I think it's been about 4 or 5 months. And he had his appointment just the other day, and they called me, and I thought, oh, this sounds like it's going to be a good call. They were so excited. The doctor said, all those tumors that I saw a few months ago, they're all gone but one. And the one is in the liver, in the lung. But he said it used to be the size of a quarter. Now it's the size of a dime. He said, I have absolutely no explanation for how this has happened. But I think I'm not going to be able to order as much chemo as I was thinking, because they're going to say, why? And so, of course, our wonderful practitioners are going, well, we kind of know why, but this is very wonderful. So I just thought it fit so well with what you were saying, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
It is, and I love the part where you were talking about the diagnosis. One of the things, many of us may have some kind of diagnosis, or we may be self-diagnosed. And I will tell you words that I chose carefully, go back 24 years ago, or more perhaps. My daughter who lives with me had a diagnosis, and we refused to say about her and she say, I have or she has. We did not own what that disease is. I have always said she has the diagnosis of, because I don't want to own that for her, and I don't want her to own that. And so that's one way of tiptoeing away. You don't necessarily avoid the treatment, but you don't have to own it. And this young woman whose story I told, Deepak says she began almost every sentence with, well, my mitral valve prolapse, da-da. Mine, she called it. So think about that. And anything, we had a wonderful woman who studied as a practitioner many years ago at Dr. Moira's first practitioner class that I was in. And she was French, and she had this wonderful way of saying something like, I have the appearance of the cold. And that's the way she put it every time. I have the appearance of. And she had no shame in saying it that way. And that is that not associating yourself with what it is that appears to be going on. And you've given essentially that person said, no, I don't want to know too much about it. I'll do what you say, but I'm not owning it. He may not have said that, but that's what he was not doing. Thank you, Ann. I appreciate that. And that's at Founders, which is where Ann is a part of. And David has something to say.
Thank you, Reverend Katherine. That was excellent. I had a lot of diagnosis when I was young, how did you word that again?
What now?
When you worded, you don't say I had.
You say I have the diagnosis of.
Oh, I had the diagnosis of when I was younger. I managed to work my whole life. I worked at Beverly Hills Hotel and guest services, Marriott, Stouffer, Westin, and I was able to conquer and overcome all the things that I was diagnosed. And what really helped me was going to church and going to services and believing in myself. And that was really the way that it all went.
Yes.
Also, I'd like for you to pray for Beverly. She's just got a cold, but she would like prayer at any event.
And what's her name again?
Beverly.
I thought it was
Our-
Beverly. I'm
Our
just
beloved
making sure.
Beverly, yes.
I thought, wait, maybe you said something, Beverly.
Yeah. And also my cousins from North Carolina that are going through some stuff because of what happened there.
I think we can imagine.
Yeah.
And actually, I know we read a lot of things on the news, and maybe we have relatives that are, or friends who are going through some things. I know a number of people that are in the path, actually even in Florida. So I'm practicing the same thing with them, because this isn't just about disease, it's about everything. It's not necessarily seeing what happens as like the worst thing that could possibly ever happen to me. It's something that I need to go through. It's a matter of attitude, because don't get your cells and your idea that you have to own all of this disaster. That's, to me, that is part of it, and I thank you for bringing that up. Do you want to attach a name to North Carolina? We could just say North
My
Carolina.
Aunt Evelyn and her family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of other people in North Carolina, so maybe we could do that. Is that okay? Okay. Yes. Anyone else have a comment or yes? Lita in the back has.
Thank you. This is in support of what you're saying about how to navigate the perception of illness. For myself, one of the things that I'm aware of is, for example, Carl and I are currently going through oxalate clearing, which people may or may not be aware of, but there's a lot of research that supports that. It appears that our symptoms follow that. Of course, I don't have proof of it. The medical community is not really aware of that in terms of the generality that can happen all over the body. So if I choose to go to an MD and say, here, I have XYZ symptoms, what do you think it is? I'm well aware that the likelihood that they'll even consider oxalate clearing is very, very low. And they will do, presumably out of either the system or their true desire to be of help, do this test, that test, whatever, et cetera. And they may or may not come up with alternate diagnoses. What I know for myself is, in applying Deepak's teaching, it's easier for me to not have, well, what if it really is XYZ that someone else claims it is? So I just wanted to put out also that one can choose at what point to engage if one feels that one can indeed hold to the wholeness of spirit expressing in the body, even if one gets somebody else's quote-unquote expert opinion as to what may or may not be happening.
You're exactly right. And that's what we discussed in class this morning, because there is someone on the call who is experiencing a condition for which surgery has been suggested. And so just in the discussion of the class, he's beginning to, it's 3 weeks, and so he's beginning to reconsider whether he would have the surgery. Turns out, one of the people on the call had just had the surgery, and so she has this positive affirmation for what happened. Another person on the call knows someone who had it, and they are relieved of symptoms. And so to say that we are throwing out medical stuff is not the case. There are many people that come here throw out all the medical stuff. They just will not do that because of because of lots of reasons. And a book that I read many years ago called Quantum Doctor, and it was written by a quantum physicist who is also Indian. He goes through a whole book exploring all this stuff, but ultimately he says essentially what Lita just said, that we pick and choose according to what works. He mentions this particular quantum doctor person said he had a heart attack or a stroke, and he was rushed to the emergency room. The emergency techs are, doing things to him in the ambulance. He goes, he has surgery, and he recovers from all of that. And he said, if I had waited to practice Chinese herbs and Ayurvedic, I'd be dead from my symptoms before I had a chance to heal the real thing. But what he said is, I felt like whatever was going on with me had another cause that I could deal with in the way that that he found that would be helpful. And he talks about it in the book, but that's essentially it. We are the ones that are in command of not only our body, but our mind. And the mind-body connection is strong. And so how we think about it, how we frame how we think about it, is incredibly important. And that, if there's any other one thing to get from these remarks, that's it. That doesn't decide how you think about it. The how is what is important. And each one of us may be different. So are there any other requests for prayer treatment?
I add a follow-up comment.
Yes.
Bruce Lipton and there's another researcher point out what many of us here probably already know, that literally the instant you have a thought, whether it's positive or negative, you literally are producing neuropeptides of
Yes.
one kind or another that either constrict a lot of processes in the body to echo the fight or flight ability or expand them to echo the rest and digest. And part of the point that I'm trying to make also is one knows oneself best, or can. So for example, for myself, I know that I can go into picturing healing far better if I don't have the chatter of a potential diagnosis in my mind.
Right.
Other people may be perfectly fine with a potential diagnosis and may be able to even integrate that into their healing thing. So I think one key thing here is, just as we acknowledge the individuality of the way Spirit expresses through us, there's also an individuality as to how we can sustain that awareness of wholeness with or without other pieces of perception, ours and others.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. There is so much more. I mean, this book has been about all of that, talking about the chapter that talked about the neuropeptides and their connection. And they have realized that the cells talk to each other. The organs and systems talk to each other in their own language. And it's incredible how smart our body is. And our mind, and he's differentiated that between our brain, but our mind is really, really important in all of this. And he talks about the gap that may occur between that mind and body, and then narrowing the gap is really that's kind of what you're talking about. You're exploring that idea that how, yes, we have this, and yes, we have that, and how do we bring all of this together for our own benefit? But our thinking makes it so. So just knowing, truly knowing in meditation or however way what you need to know, there really isn't anything else, because the power and presence is there for you, and the law follows that. So before we get too far along, we want to do the prayer treatments. And so we are treating for Beverly, and we're treating for the people in North Carolina, very specifically thinking of David's friends and family. If you don't mind, I'm just going to sit on this step. Sorry about the camera back there, guys. There is a divine presence that I feel moving through my body all the time. When I take the time to breathe in and know that breath of Spirit is moving through my body, bringing all of the beauty, all of the joy, all of the power and the love of the universe moving through my body, I relax into the moment of truth where I recognize that the word I speak has power. And I put behind that power the conviction, the faith, the trust, the confidence that what I speak from that power that is within me now, speaking, this is the truth. And so I know for Beverly that whatever is going on in her lungs and surrounding organs, which manifests itself as something that appears to be a cold. I know that it is simply something that's moving through the system that needs attention, and that whatever is being done, the rest, the quiet, the movement, is the absolute perfect thing as the words carry forth of pure health, pure energy, pure vitality. And it courses through her to the point that she rises in her own consciousness to the idea within herself that I have returned to the divine pattern in which my health has created. It's absolutely perfect. And I breathe into that perfection, knowing that it is the truth. That is how I'm created, and that's how I am, with deep gratitude. And I know for friends and family in North Carolina and in any other place in the path of this amazing storm that has moved through the southeastern United States, I know that everyone, loss of property, feeling loss of goods, have water, have all the things that have come to define how this disaster makes its appearance. I know that there is something within each person affected by this. There is a power and understanding of what all of this means and what all of this rises within us to do. There is nothing that we cannot do. We can rise above the circumstances. We can rise above everything when we know that the power that supports us is indomitable, and it's within all of us. And any accidents, any feelings of less than just simply disappear. There is always enough. We know that the table of prosperity is laden, is overflowing with all that we ever need. We are taught that everything has already been created in the mind of God. It is simply there in the essence, and we call on everything that we need, that we want, and it is there. And it is there. So the faith, the trust, the power I put into the word that moves through this is absolutely sufficient and more to bring the good, to rise to the surface, however high that surface may be. The solutions, the ideas, the creativity, the goods and services, everything. Anything that I can imagine, God has already created. It is in the mind of God. And I know this truth for all of those affected by this storm. That what comes from this is good in ways that we cannot even imagine. But when I know that it is so, it is so. There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And I choose to see good, to find good, to reach out with goodness in my heart, compassion in my soul, and kindness in my way of life, no matter what. And that is how I, and each of the I's in this room, bring about a better and creative world. I know that this good, this truth, lives beyond these words because it is the truth. And I simply allow it to be in such deep gratitude for all that I have in perfect form and know that it's good and very good and say, and so it is. I thank you all for being here, for staying so long. We've moved through this. This is a wonderful time to be alive. It is rich with promise and rich with ways to understand. Grab onto it, make it your own, and be with it. See you next Wednesday.